Welcome back to AI Paper Podcasts. Today, we're really digging into this idea that bigger isn't always better in AI. We're looking at a paper that flips the script on scaling.
That's right. It's called Less is More, Recursive Reasoning with Tiny Networks. And honestly, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by the sheer size of frontier models, this is a really refreshing take, especially for certain types of hard problems.
Okay, yeah, let's get straight to the core idea, kind of the 1-minute summary for everyone. The big issue this paper tackles is that, well, huge LLMs. They often really struggle with tasks needing super precise, multi-step reasoning. Think about things like Sudoku or complex mazes, even those tough ARC-AGI benchmarks.
Exactly. They're auto-regressive, right? So one tiny mistake early on, even if you're using something like chain of thought, the whole thing can just fall apart.
So the paper introduces this thing called the Tiny Recursive Model, or TRM, and tiny is the key word here. It uses just one small network, only 7 million parameters, just 2 layers deep.
And instead of throwing more parameters at the problem, it uses deep, iterative recursion. It sort of thinks over the problem again and again.
And the results are, frankly, staggering. TRM doesn't just compete. It smashes its predecessor, the HRM model, and even beats out massive LLMs on these specific tasks. We're talking like 45% test accuracy on ARC-AGI 1 and a crazy 87% on Sudoku Extreme.
Yeah, and that 87% on Sudoku, that's with less than, 0.01% of the parameters of the big guys. It's a huge efficiency gain.
Incredible. So our mission today is to unpack how they pulled this off. How did this TRM model achieve such a massive leap in generalization?
Well, the spoiler is that they did it by radically simplifying the architecture, being really rigorous about how they trained the recursion, ditching some, let's say, questionable assumptions from earlier work.
Right. Okay. So to really get why TRM is such a big deal, we need a bit of context, right? What came before? You mentioned these hard reasoning puzzles.
Yeah, things where you need symbolic manipulation, step-by-step logic. And like you said, even the best general LLMs struggle. That Gemini 2.5 Pro number on ARC-AGI 2, what was it, like 4.9%?
Yeah, 4.9%. It really shows that just being enormous doesn't automatically grant you that kind of reliable, structured reasoning capability.
Exactly. So before TRM, the specialized state-of-the-art for these puzzles was a model called the Hierarchical Reasoning Model, or HRM. HRM was kind of the first proof that smaller, dedicated networks could actually handle these puzzles. But, well, it was complicated.
How complicated?
Well, first off, it used 2 separate networks. They called them $5 and $5. And the justification was based on these pretty complex, maybe even speculative ideas about how low and high frequency signals work in the brain.
Huh. So like trying to build a brain analogy directly into the architecture?
Sort of felt that way, yeah. And it was already pretty big for a specialized model, around 27 million parameters compared to TRM's 7 million. Then there was the math side. It leaned really heavily on something called the implicit function theorem, or IFT.
IFT. Okay, what was the purpose of that?
It was basically a shortcut. HRM used multiple recursive steps internally, like 6 steps. But to save compute and memory, it assumed the internal state, the features, had already settled into a stable fixed point after those steps. Based on that assumption, using the IFT, they figured they only needed to backpropagate the error signal through the last 1 or maybe 2 steps.
Ah, so they were approximating the gradient, assuming the earlier steps didn't matter much because things had supposedly converged?
Precisely. But the TRM paper looked into this and found, well, that assumption was likely flawed. Their analysis suggested those internal features probably hadn't converged to a fixed point when they applied that shortcut.
So they were calculating the gradient based on a shaky foundation.
Exactly. Saving compute, maybe, but potentially sacrificing learning quality. And that's where TRM really diverges.
Okay, so TRM's philosophy was basically, let's ditch the complex biology analogies, let's ditch the potentially flawed math shortcuts, and just simplify.
Radically simplify. Yeah, that was the goal. Get rid of the baggage.
So they start with one single network. Tiny, just 2 layers. What's the core mechanism then? You mentioned recursion, but how does it work? They call it deep supervision.
Right. So imagine you feed the model the input problem, let's call it $6.
All right.
It also maintains a current proposed answer, yawns, and this internal reasoning state, $6. Over multiple steps, they use 16 supervision steps, 16 $30. It does this loop. First, it updates the reasoning state, $6. Then, using that updated SIG, it updates the answered yawn.
So it's iteratively refining both its internal thought process and the actual solution based on that process.
Exactly. It's a cycle of reasoning and predicting, getting progressively better with each step within that supervision window.
And crucially, how did they handle the gradient problem that HRM tried to shortcut with IFT?
This is maybe the single biggest change. They called it gradient honesty, which I like. They just got rid of the IFT approximation entirely. If the model used, say, number 1466 LL recursive evaluations within a step.
They backpropagated through all 6.
All 6. No shortcuts. They calculated the true gradient across the entire internal reasoning chain. They traded that computational shortcut for, well, accuracy in the learning signal.
And the impact of just that change.
Huge. They did an ablation study. On Sudoku Extreme, switching from HRM's one-step gradient approximation to TRM's full backpropagation took accuracy from 56.5% all the way up to 87.4%.
Wow, okay, that's not just tuning, that's fundamental. It suggests that for these structured tasks, really understanding the flow of reasoning through all the steps is critical for learning.
Absolutely. The quality of that internal gradient tracing back through the entire sequence seems way more important than saving a bit of memory by approximating it.
Okay, let's dig into the final TRM architecture a bit more. Even with one network, they still kept 2 internal features, yellow colors. Why 2 if they dropped the whole hierarchical brain analogy?
Good question. They found it's functionally necessary for keeping context. You can think of Jowlers as the current answer, the solution being built. And $0, that's like the reasoning trace, the mental scratch pad. It holds the context of how the model arrived at the current YAL.
So Zero stops the model from just like jumping to conclusions without remembering the intermediate steps. It needs the path as well as the destination.
Exactly right. Zero provides the necessary context to properly refine Zero in the next iteration. And they tested this. They ran an ablation where they tried using only a single feature. Performance dropped quite a bit, down to about 71.9% accuracy. So you really do seem to need both the current state of the answer and the reasoning trace that got you there.
Makes sense. And HRM used 2 different networks, $5 for updating, $0 for updating $0. TRM uses just one network, but still needs to perform those 2 different updates. How does a single network handle 2 tasks?
This part is quite elegant, actually. The difference isn't in the network weights, it's in what you feed the network. When it's time to update the reasoning state, they include the original problem input 6 DOM along with the current ERBLR, but when it's time to update the answer for S, based on the newly updated Cillier, they exclude the original input $6.
So just by controlling whether the raw problem description is visible, they guide the single network to either reason about the problem or predict the next step of the solution.
Precisely. It's a very neat way to achieve task separation without needing separate parameters. And the simplification. It didn't just have the parameter count, it also contributed to that performance boost on Sudoku, nudging it from 82.4% up to the final 87.4%. Less complexity, better results.
Okay, and the layer count thing is still kind of blowing my mind. They found decreasing layers from 4 down to just 2, while increasing the recursion depth was actually better for generalization. That feels backwards.
It does feel counterintuitive, right? But think about the training data. For things like Sudoku Extreme, they only had about 1,000 examples. That's tiny. A deeper network, even a small one with 4 layers, might have enough capacity to just memorize or overfit to those specific 1,000 puzzles, including their noise and quirks.
Okay.
But by using a very shallow network to do layers and forcing it to apply itself repeatedly through deep recursion, you're essentially adding a strong regularization effect. The model has very limited capacity in any single step, so it can't just memorize. It's forced to learn the underlying generalizable process or structure of solving the puzzle because it has to apply that same simple process over and over.
I see. So the deep recursion acts like a constraint, forcing the shallow network to find a truly general solution because it doesn't have the capacity to cheat by memorizing.
That seems to be the idea. It's like you're replacing network depth with temporal depth, the depth of the recursive process.
Yeah.
And that seems to be much better at avoiding overfitting on small structured data sets.
That's a really powerful concept. Okay, let's talk efficiency. 2 layers, 1 ND6 or 6 recursions per step, 2 NG3 3 forward passes. They calculate an effective depth.
Yeah, the effective depth is pretty impressive. With those hyperparameters, it works out to 42 layers of computation per supervision step.
So you get the computational reach of a much deeper network, but with the tiny parameter footprint and memory costs of a 2-layer model, that's serious leverage.
It really is. It's getting deep network computation without the deep network parameter cost.
They also improved on the efficiency of training itself, specifically with adaptive computation time, or ACT. HRM's version sounded costly.
It was. HRM used ACT, which lets the model decide how many internal steps it needs, but its implementation involved this Q-learning objective, and calculating that objective required a whole second forward pass through the model on every single optimization step just to figure out this continual loss. Basically doubled the training compute.
Ouch. So what did TRM do?
They streamlined it massively. They just tossed the Q-learning part and the continued loss. Instead, they use a simple binary cross-entropy loss on a halting probability output by the model. Basically, the model learns to signal when it thinks it's done or converged. This simple change eliminated that entire second forward pass, cutting training time significantly, and crucially, they found it didn't hurt generalization at all. Big win.
Efficiency upon efficiency. Now, training on small, difficult data sets can be unstable, right? Models can suddenly collapse or diverge. Did they run into that?
They did, especially on Sudoku Extreme. They mentioned the risk of sharp collapse. To combat this, they used exponential moving average, or EMA, on the model weights. They used a high decay factor, 9999.
EMA, so basically smoothing out the weight updates over time.
Exactly. It helps prevent drastic sudden changes in the weights based on noisy gradients from small batches. It acts as a stabilizer. And they found this was key. Adding EMA boosted the Sudoku Extreme accuracy again from around 79.9% up to that final 87.4%. So a crucial detail for stable training on sparse data.
Got it. One last architectural detail, attention versus MLP. They actually found sometimes not using attention was better.
Yeah, this was interesting. They tried swapping out the self-attention mechanism for just a simple multi-layer perceptron in MLP. And for tasks with small, fixed-size inputs where relationships are very local, like a 9x9 Sudoku grid, the MLP version actually performed better. It gave about a 10% accuracy boost on Sudoku.
So for those grids, the complexity of self-attention was just unnecessary overhead.
Seems like it. If the context is small and the important relationships are always between nearby cells, a simple MLP can capture that efficiently. But, and this is important, but they caution it doesn't hold universally.
Right, because for bigger grids like a 30 by 30 maze or for visual reasoning like ARC-AGI, the important connections might be much further apart.
Exactly. For those tasks where you need to model long-range dependencies across a large input space, self-attention still seems to be the better architectural choice, the better inductive bias. That's why the best TRM model for ARC uses attention, TRNT, while the best for Sudoku might be attention-free. It depends on the task structure.
Okay, let's recap some of those headline performance numbers again, putting TRM against the others.
Right. So Sudoku Extreme, TRM gets 87.4%. The previous best, HRM, was way back at 55.0%. On Mazehard, TRM hits 85.3%, while HRM was at 74.5%.
Okay.
So clear wins over the predecessor specialized model.
But the comparison against the giants is where it gets really interesting, especially on ARC-AGI, that geometric reasoning benchmark.
Yeah. TRM, the attention version with just 7 million parameters, achieves 44.6% on ARC-AGI1 and 7.8% on ARC-AGI2. Remember, HRM, which is 4 times larger at 27 M-params, only got 40.3% and 5.0%.
And the big LLMs like Gemini 2.5 Pro.
Even with lots of test time compute, Gemini 2.5 Pro scored lower, 37.0% on ARC1 and 4.9% on ARC2. So this tiny 7M parameter TRM is outperforming models that are orders of magnitude larger on this specific challenging reasoning task.
That parameter efficiency is just wild. And you mentioned earlier, these high scores are achieved on really small training sets.
Yeah, often just 1,000 examples, which makes the generalization even more impressive. Of course, they rely heavily on data augmentation, shuffling parts of the input, using geometric transformations like rotations and flips to help the model generalize from that limited data.
So pulling it all together, TRM really feels like a case study in, well, the paper's title, less is more.
Absolutely. It's about achieving better generalization and efficiency through deliberate simplification. They got rid of complex, perhaps unnecessary theoretical baggage from HRM, focused on a clean single network architecture, embraced deep recursion, and crucially ensured gradient quality through full backpropagation.
It strongly suggests that for certain kinds of structured, symbolic reasoning, especially when you don't have massive data sets, brute force scaling isn't the answer. This deep recursive approach with a tiny model seems incredibly effective.
It provides a really compelling alternative paradigm. Focus the model, make it work harder iteratively, rather than just making it bigger.
But the paper does end with a bit of a mystery, doesn't it? A question for the field.
Yeah, it's a great provocative thought. We see empirically that this deep recursion with a shallow network is really good at preventing overfitting compared to just making the network deeper non-recurrently. But why exactly? What's the theoretical underpinning? Why does forcing a shallow model to reuse itself over time provide such a strong regularization benefit compared to just giving a deeper model more parameters to potentially misuse?
How do we formalize that? That's the challenge.
That's the big open question they leave us with. And maybe one other thing to consider is the current limitation. TRM, like HRM before it, is supervised. It learns to find the correct answer. The next frontier might be extending this kind of tiny, efficient recursive reasoning to generative tasks, where you need to produce multiple valid, novel outputs, not just find one predetermined solution.
Fascinating stuff, a really clear demonstration that innovation isn't just about scale. Sometimes it's about finding elegance and simplicity.
Definitely a paper worth pondering if you're thinking about model efficiency and the nature of reasoning.